Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody, depending on what part of the world you're tuning in from. Larry Wilson here with uh, Dr. Waddah Ghanem, who's a friend. He's been on this show before, and we're going to talk today about ESG. And as Waddah said when we were on the phone, it's not a new food additive, although certainly when I'm talking to some folks, the deer in the headlights look you get when you mention ESG. You might as well think, Waddah, that it almost is a new food additive the way some people are thinking about it. But first of all, Waddah, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the show. I know you're incredibly busy. And for those of you who haven't heard Dr. Waddah either on the expert panels or on the show before, he's the honorary chairman of the Energy Institute in the Middle East. Amongst a number of other things, senior director for marine operations, Emirates National Oil Company. But Waddah, again, welcome and thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Larry, and an interesting subject that we're gonna go through today. And yeah, as I told you, I mean, when I speak to people, if you speak to certain people about ESG now, it's become pretty well known. You speak to investors and the capital markets, they really understand what ESG is. And I think in our discussion, just set the context for today's discussion. What I'm going to try to do very quickly, just make a quick presentation with a couple of points about ESG and what it is and where it's come from and how it links how it links to basically so many things that us as present or past EHS practitioners need to understand. And so I'll take you through the presentation, Larry, very quickly, and the audience, and then maybe we can have a discussion, take some questions from the people from the chat room. All right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to share. Done.
It's just for everybody, so the background. Waddah and I, Waddah has a partner, Bob, and they do a lot of work with boards of directors. And we were talking about governance at that level, and the conversation just sort of naturally segued to ESG. And somewhat ironically, I think I was asking Waddah, I said, well, should probably get somebody on the show to talk about ESG. And then Waddah and I ended up talking about ESG for about 45 minutes. And then I said, why don't you I think it would be, easier, Waddah, if you just did it. So again, thanks for putting the presentation, all this stuff together too, Waddah. I know you got a million things to do, but take it away if you can. Give us what it is, where did it come from, where did it start, maybe the 50,000-foot view, and then take us into a bit of the detail too, if you could, Waddah. That'd be great.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, so I just dropped out there for a problem, but we're okay now. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my screen, Larry?
Hi, Larry. Mike here. Hi, everyone. Show producer on. Looks like Waddah is having a bit of connectivity issues. We're just going to try to sort it out and get him back as soon as possible.
Can you not see me?
I can see you. Can't see your screen yet.
Oh, you want me to? Yeah. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes. Good.
Excellent.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right. Wonderful. Okay. Wonderful. So, so once again, Larry, thanks for inviting us today to talk about this. And when I came across ESG, as you said, I've been involved a lot in the last probably 5 to 10 years in boards, and today, especially with listed companies and various types of companies that you can invest in, ESG has become really a key.
Larry, could I ask, are you picking up Waddah's audio?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So investors, really like to understand what is the ESG index for companies that they're investing in, and the whole point is because it's about the long-term sustainability and the value proposition of investing in an organization that will continue to grow, will continue not to have problems, in the ESG areas, which I'm going to explain in a minute. So once again, thanks. Short presentation. I'm not going to get into too much details. Some of this stuff, some of the people online today would sort of understand. I'll sort of just pass through this very quickly. Waddah Ghanem al-Hashimi. I've got several qualifications and board directorships. I've worked with NGOs, industry forums, private joint stock companies, and in advisory roles as well. I have various interests, as you can see, and various subject areas. And as you know, Larry, I've worked in various different areas, and so this is an area actually which I'm growing, which is of growing interest to me as well, and sustainability, especially with regards to boards. These are various books that I've written of or I've co-authored. This one, the 10-step MBA, I've got a few more details about it right at the end of this presentation. Just to sort of talk a little bit about that publication, because I think it may be applicable to some of the people who are joining us tonight or this morning. So the presentation will cover, what does ESG really stand for? Why is it really important? And I'll take you through a little bit of history, and the importance of stakeholder mapping when dealing with ESG. There's a big, strong focus on CSR, corporate social responsibility. I'll talk about that. And I'll end with talking about integrated reporting and ESG strategy, and really focusing, then putting it all together and seeing where EHS practitioners would benefit from understanding ESG a bit better. So what is ESG? The term really is about, combining environment, social, and governance. So the environmental aspects of an organization, the social aspects, and governance, and these also are all critical factors for sustainability for organizations. In some sustainability reports and in some jurisdictions around the world, I think listed companies in various jurisdictions in the world, they have to actually have certain disclosures. So there are many systems around the world for reporting ESG in different jurisdictions. There's some very famous ones like the GRI reporting sort of system, which is very, very widely used, but there's many others as well. It's mostly voluntary reporting. However, it's becoming more and more an expectation from society's stakeholders and listed companies. Sometimes it's very important because it's an important index that we need to look at. Mostly reported in sustainability, or what we call today integrated reports. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So the historical overview really of this is, pre-1990s, we had, sort of the UN, a few corporate law stuff and management theories about, what's important about, sustainable development. Then voluntary codes and guidance started coming in after the 1990s. And when we started looking at sustainable development after Rio, then around between sort of the turn of the century, we started looking at the UNGC, looking at different types of standards and systems in different jurisdictions. So the FTSE, for example, for good, this is the UK Financial Times, top 100 organizations. And then we had the corporate governance laws, which were coming in, things like comply or explain, and mandatory laws of codes and things like that. And we started to see a lot more international harmonization. But then post 2008, interestingly, and sort of coinciding with the sort of the international financial crisis and stuff like that, we started seeing more the advent of CSR reports. And for the first time, we started seeing something called ESG reports, which covered, social governance and environmental issues. And then we had the SDGs coming in after the Paris Agreement, which we'll cover in a minute. So all the frameworks and looking at all this kind of stuff. So some of you might be familiar with these kind of codes and stuff. And then since 2016, really, sustainability reports, ESG criteria, and covering other areas of enterprise risks such as cyber risk, external audits, and now more so, there's more and more mandatory reporting and expectations, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So who uses sustainability reports? Everyone, really. Institutional investors, special interest groups, NGOs, people want to know what your company is doing and what they're doing and how they're doing it and are they doing it right or wrong. Employees, competitive employees actually are one of the most important stakeholders, because to be an employer of choice, a lot of employees, especially the millennials and younger people, really they really care about working for a company that cares about the environment and about society at large and wants to be sustainable and has fair governance practices, etc. And then competitors also look at your report, because it's like everybody wants to compete in that space of good. The regulators obviously take interest in your report because you're voluntary reporting, and when you're voluntary reporting, they can always come back from the other door and say, "Hey, listen, man, you reported this and that. We want to know these targets." Yeah, they can always catch you there. So you better know your Bible, as they say. And partners also. I mean, partners who want to come in, people want to be JV partners with you. They want to know, how good your organization is, and do you care about ESG issues? So, so some of you would know about this. This is what is really critical for ESG reporting and mapping is stakeholder mapping. This really defines who has the greatest interest in your organization, how to address them and their needs. It defines who can influence from your stakeholders and where they influence, and helps you develop a strategy on management of these stakeholders, because you've got many stakeholders, like you can see on this example diagram. The regulators, the shareholders, the media, the clients, the special interest groups, the environment agencies, the banks, the rating agencies, and even the courts. And in this stakeholder analysis, what you do is you review this periodically, and you see who has high interest, low interest, low influence, or high influence, and try to put them there. And then you have a strategy of either keeping them informed, not really spending too much time bothering about it, keeping them satisfied, or keeping them informed and involved and contributing. Because so as you can see, generally with most stakeholder mapping, you'll find a lot of these sort of circles, and the size of the circle shows you the greater impact of these stakeholders. So this is a really good strategy move forward, right? So to do the stakeholder mapping. Then when we move on to corporate social responsibility, and I think many of you know this, and again, there's been a movement over the years on this. We've moved mainly from very like philanthropic kind of practices, and the early 1900s, the labor practices, even as old as the Napoleonic sort of regulations that looked at welfare of people. In the 1970s, obviously, the social responsibility movements sort of started, and then in like the 1980s and early 90s, it was more about charity, consumer rights, anti-corruption, and there was a lot of stuff on health and safety as well. So that looking at it as a welfare issue for people in the organization. Then we started moving in the 1990s, something called the triple bottom line, looking at all these issues about people, planet, whatever, and then we started then looking at risk management, and then post 2000, CSR, the ISO 26001, the SA 8000, which is more common in the States, the Social Accountability Standard 8000. And these sustainability models, and it started integrating with other stuff, and start talking about diversity and human rights and environment, and bring things together. So it takes into account really all the expectations of the stakeholders. And today, CSR has become really very, very important for organizations to talk about. They can't just ignore it, right? And there's some laws also which have been coming in certain countries. I think India and the Maldives and Singapore were probably one of the first countries in the world to actually put in a CSR tax. as such. So organizations, corporate has to pay tax to CSR, which is then re-injected into CSR activities, and should be integrated throughout the organization and practiced in all of the relationships that you have. The 7 principles, as per the ISO 26000, which is the international code that covers this. So many of you will be familiar with the ISO 45001. That's for the health and safety management. Well, ISO 26001 is really for corporate social responsibility management. So it looks at accountability, transparency, ethical behavior, respecting the stakeholder interests. So all the stakeholders, not only the shareholders, right? And then respect the rule of law, respect for international norms of behavior, and most importantly, probably respect for human rights. The future trends, we think, for corporate social responsibility will be definitely more absorbed into the ESG, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. The 26,000 is an important standard, so it's really marketing itself, because you can get a nice badge that you're ISO 26001, kind of accredited firm. CSR indices are shifting into the ESG model, and I'll show a bit of those just before the end. And firms continue to like reporting CSR initiatives separately to sustainability reports on their websites, because they want to put that. And in some countries in the world, CSR is even more important than sustainability, although climate change issues now are coming into the front and center. And the broad opportunity to expand engagement and initiatives compared to international peers, because you're acting globally, but you're locally. So what is the scope for ESG? Do you want to ask anything, Larry, or just continue?
No, actually, what I'm just sort of, I'm actually following along. I'm not making too many notes, but it's exactly what I was hoping you'd be doing, just sort of painting the picture for us about where it all comes from, and sort of, obviously from the big picture, eventually we got to get down to, if you're a safety professional, what do you need to know, and what might you not know, so that you don't get caught. Caught would be the wrong word, but it's like an embarrassing moment when an executive asks you something and you've got that deer in the headlights look as well too, right? Like, because you're really, right. So the idea here obviously isn't to be able to, provide a step-by-step roadmap for each person that's watching, but more of to give them the idea of what it's all about, and then a little maybe more detail about where they need to start, or where they can look for resources and things like that. So but Waddah, actually, thanks for asking, but really the truth is, so far I'm just watching, and it's great. So carry on.
Thanks. So the scope of the ESG, so the environmental factors include the company's record on pollution and waste, climate change risks that it faces. So it doesn't cover only the traditional environmental parameters that EHS people are generally engaged with only, but they're looking at various different issues today. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, there's a lot of stuff about energy as well, and energy conservation and using alternatives and things like that. So it's becoming more and more integrated. On the social issues that I've just discussed, really on the CSR, the range from labor relations to product liability to efforts also to increase gender and ethnic diversity in the workforce. This is becoming very important also, even not only in the workforce, but even up to the boards, and having the right kind of diversity in boards. But the social issues include also welfare and health and safety issues. And on the governance issues, these really encompass the business ethics, the shareholder rights, the management compensation and incentivization, and really the transparency in sort of the rewards that are given to executives, for example, or to the board, and so on and so forth. But the equal rights, how do you pay people? Do you pay females a different type of wage scale than males, or certain ethnic groups more than others, and things like that? So it just expects organizations to bring that up to the front. So there's a lot of stuff which is linked either directly or indirectly EHS.
Well, there's also the idea that if you had a target, for instance, of a 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, is there a requirement sort of within ESG, Waddah, to be able to document the progress of that project, if you will, to achieve that goal? And would a safety professional with environmental responsibilities somehow be required to come up with the documentation or to be able to show that indeed the project is on time, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not directly into the report, but in the reports, so generally a lot of companies, either the smaller companies usually use a sort of an external consultant to sort of put all this information together and then present it in a certain way, because sustainability reports, integrated reports need to be in a certain format. In fact, if this report, it becomes sort of an assured report, which means that an external third-party assurance has come and assured all the numbers and stuff. But at the end of the day, you'd need to know, like, so for example, on this diagram on the right, you can see environment, greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, energy management, water and wastewater management, hazardous waste stuff, ecological footprint, maybe carbon impact and stuff like that, and footprint. And then on the social side, you've got the human rights, but you've got also the health and safety of employees, and for example, the working hours, looking at issues of mental health now is becoming really, really important. So you will see that there's a few of these KPIs, if you like, which need to be collected under leadership and governance, environment, whatever, the social capital stuff, which requires attention, maybe from EHS people, or they will be reporting on those numbers. So the whole idea is to improve the quality of the information available. So integrated reporting said, well, why do you have separate reports for sustainability, CSR, financial reports? The stakeholder or the shareholder should be able to get all that information in one report. And so the integrated report looks at that. There's a framework around that, which I don't have the time to really get into, but it requires. And if you're interested in it, if you go to integrated reporting, you'll find a lot of information about the frameworks. But really promoting.
I mean, I'm not to sound really crass or base, but is one of the main reasons for ESG and having an ESG rating is that the stock market and investors have got lots of numbers to consider. So when it comes to things like sustainability, corporate governance, ethics, all the rest of that stuff, that getting it all into one number for the rating just makes it easier for them to decide whether it's a good investment or not? Or does the main driver for ESG go beyond the investors?
Well, I mean, it's supposed to go beyond the investors. As I said, who reads these sustainability reports and integrated reports nowadays? Employees read these kind of reports, because if you're going to go work for a company, or you're working for a company, you want to know really what your company is doing, and because most employees care about their kids, right? Care about they want to work with an organization that's gonna help their the world be there in another 20 years time, and if it is, should be an inhabitable world, right? So there is a lot of stakeholders who take a great deal of interest in looking at this. But interestingly, I mean, I don't have the charts here, but if you go and you look at the Dow, there's a Dow Sustainability Index. Most of the organizations whose sustainability index has improved, there is a direct correlation between the stock value and effectively also the continuity of the organization and the earnings per share for stocks of companies which have a better Dow Sustainability Index, or reporting on Sustainability Index, and the Sustainability Index is sort of improving. On the target setting that you talked about, or you asked, Larry, yes, I mean, you would have sort of short-term targets for this year, but you'd also present your achievement of the 2030, for example, plan. a lot of companies, especially big organizations, government organizations who get involved in this, especially in countries like etc. But it's coming here in the Middle East as well. They actually align their SDG targets with that government, or they call the national targets. And some of them, because like in the UK, they say, look, after 2030 or after 2035, no more petrol and whatever petroleum products used in as fuels. Everything has to move to electric and stuff like that. So if you're going to be investing in a company that manufactures cars, I mean, you'd want to know your long-term investment that these guys are actually moving towards a business model reinvention and innovation, and changing the way that their product lines are and what they're doing. And in the meantime, they're working towards improving the environment, right? So, but it also enhances the accountability and stewardship, because it sort of it covers other areas like financial, manufactured products, intellectual IP, human capital, social and relationships, and the natural environment as well. Promote this understanding of their independencies and how they're also connected, and support integrated thinking and the decision making and the creation of value over, as I said, the short, medium, and the long term. So your ESG strategy as such is integrated reporting, looks at performing an ESG, first of all, we call materiality assessment. This is done by identifying the external stakeholders and the internal stakeholders and the users, and then saying, look, what is important to us? And then you do something like a stakeholder mapping using a 4x4 matrix again, and trying to understand materiality. And understanding materiality, not you as a company, but your stakeholders. And you bring all the stakeholders in a room, and you ask them what is important, and you get them to score things, and then you sort of understand what is materially important from an ESG perspective in your organization. Then you go and build a map, identify the available information and the internal subject owners for developing these ESG initiatives, and what kind of useful disclosures are there. And remember what I said about disclosures. You better be sure that you're disclosing something and you're doing something about it. You can't just disclose something and not be doing it. That will get yourself into some serious trouble. And then following ESG disclosure path, using company-specific sort of KPIs to mentor the ESG strategy internally. So that's where also EHS people get involved, because a lot of the KPIs are environmental, health and safety KPIs, and so on and so forth. I think when we did our, long time ago, when we did our GRI report, I sort of looked at directly the kind of ESG related or GRI related KPIs out of like 100 and something different KPIs. At least about 15, 20 of them had something to do with either environment or health and safety directly. So reaching the ESG goals, effectively communicating your ESG risks and the long-term business strategy. So the idea is a bit different here, Larry, where we're looking at, if we don't manage the ESG properly, effectively every year we're going to have more and more risks, because we're not managing environment and social and governance issues. So what ends up happening is that your share value can really suffer, and people start really getting worried about investing in your company, because they start saying, well, this company, I don't think it's going to last very long, because they're going to have a corporate scandal, or they're going to, I don't know, poison a river, or they're going to do some disaster,
But the idea that there's that ESG and your stock price are correlated, maybe not directly, but that there is a correlation, means that there's now like billions, trillions of dollars behind it. So whereas before, I mean, not to date myself, but it was common for folks to meet environmental regulations or be on the borderline, but there was no financial incentive to necessarily be better than your competitors in terms of a carbon footprint, because it was cost money, but it wouldn't improve your share price necessarily. So this is, I think, very encouraging in a way, Waddah. I mean, because obviously if everything is being forced by inspectors and by government authorities, if you will, like, worrying about the OSHA inspector or the environmental inspector, versus worrying about your boss and the boss worrying about the share price. I think we'd all have more faith in the money than the inspectors. You know, I mean, even if we got twice as many inspectors, I don't think any of us thinks things would improve 100% at all, right? So I think this is very encouraging.
Yeah, I think what it does also, Larry, you know, it encourages like sort of a, I mean, I don't want to use the word, I mean, regulators don't like this, especially in certain jurisdictions, but this whole self-regulating. So what you're actually doing is you're publishing your data, and you're publishing your position on various things. You're publishing your KPIs, you're publishing your targets, you're publishing your short, medium, and long-term kind of thing. And you're saying, well, ESG is a long-term business strategy for me. So I'm gonna maintain doing this, and I'm gonna remain sustainable and relevant as a value adding organization in the future. So that really brings me to an end, because I thought anything more than this would sort of just go into, we could talk for hours on ESGs. And by the way, there's so many different systems, and I'm part of the Dubai financial sustainable finance working group, and we've developed even a sort of a self-audit or self-audit system on asking yourself certain questions and how you're connected to SDGs and so on. But generally, people who get involved in that kind of audit are people who are more familiar with the ESG systems. I do encourage a lot of HSE practitioners to sort of get into this space, because it's an important space, and you know, money makes the world go round, right? So at the end of the day, as you said, Larry, or as we said, the share price is very much connected to ESG indexes, sustainability index. So ESG is becoming more and more important as a factor that impacts investments into organizations, but also as an employer and a supplier of services and products. You know, you really need to be looking at this. Effectively, it looks at a give good measure of the quality of governance you have in an organization, and the fairness, and you know, how much people are getting paid. If you remember in 2009, Larry, I mean, people, you know, these banks, you know, nearly ruined the economy by, you know, over lending and this and that. And then at the end of this, and when the government sort of bailed out the banks, you know, it was crazy, because in the financial reporting, a lot of these listed companies and the banks, you know, their executives and their board directors still got paid, you know, big bonuses, and people start questioning, how can you pay these people bonuses? I mean, they nearly destroyed the economy. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Governance, you know. But you know, Larry, you and me, we're in the wrong business, my friend. You know. But anyway, socially responsible organizations and environmental stewardship, and I would like to use the word stewardship here as opposed to management, because really today, what ESG reporting is talking about is that what you're really doing to, because the world's in a bad place, from a climate change point of view, from a total carbon footprint point of view, from a, you know, and we can see the kind of bad things which are happening in terms of climatic changes. So really, organizations, you know, want to position themselves as in environmental stewardship positions, as opposed to being the environmental officer or the EHS officer who goes around in, you know, and sort of does a checklist, and oh, I've got ISO 14001 and I've got so and so certification in environment. No, I think the consumers, the stakeholders today expect organizations to step up not onto the plate, but right at the top of the plate where they're stewarding this, and they want leaders of organizations to not only talk the talk, but really walk the walk when it comes to environment. And so it's a mistake for HSE practitioner. Therefore, it's so important, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of EHS sort of KPIs which are linked to ESG reports and inputs into ESG reports. So you should really know what you're reporting, and now these reports are going to go out there, and they're going to be presented to the outside world. So you should really be knowing and take a serious interest how other peers in your industry are doing, because people are going to start comparing you and saying, well, what's your carbon footprint per employee? What's your carbon footprint for, I don't know, per barrel of oil sold? Or what's your carbon footprint per, I don't know, hot dog produced, you know, whatever it is, you know.
Is it also going to include like what's your injury rating, serious injuries, injuries and things like that as well? Serious incidents.
Yeah,
right? From
LTIFRs, and injuries, fatalities, obviously, and also more and more employee and contractor welfare issues are covered. I remember, Larry, maybe 15 years ago, we used to have this discussion, in all these EHS conferences I used to go to, that, hey, man, do you combine the contractor data with your own employees' data? We did that for a long time. And some companies used to tell us, no, we keep them separate because, the contract is separate, and the employees are separate because, but, you employ about 5 times more employees in your workforce, to do stuff. Of course, you gotta bring in the contract, and the contractor welfare is part of your responsibility. I mean, there's a duty of care, there's all this ethical business, but the fact is that the contractor is working hand in hand and day by day alongside your employee. And why are you treating them as like a second class human being? I mean, they all bleed like us, they all live and die like us. And so this issue of employee and contractor welfare issues, and companies representing this, and EHS people really get involved a lot in this nowadays, more on the mental welfare aspects. COVID was a very good example of that, and I'm sure you're going to touch on that later on, Larry. And the governance and leadership in HSE, and that takes us to the point what you mentioned, the work that me and Bob Arnold are doing, and the book that's coming out in the 1st of July on governance and leadership in health and safety, which is basically managing the top management responsibilities within the ISO 45001 standard. And the book also presents a suggested standard for organizations. It also has a suggested terms of reference for an XCOM level leadership health and safety committee. And so my closing thought is really expand your horizon. If you're an HSE practitioner, I mean, get to go and learn about this, man. Go learn about ESG. This presentation wasn't meant to sort of educate you guys completely on ESG. It's just to give you a bit of a taster. But interest, take the interest, Yeah.
Well, so okay, let me just take it from scratch, Waddah. If this was somebody's first exposure to ESG, or very close to their first exposure to it, where would you sort of suggest they go from here to get some more information, or, if you will, just to build a little more baseline knowledge? Any sort of references that you could throw out there?
Well, yeah, I mean the best of stand. I mean, you could start right back at GRI. GRI is very good. They have a lot of standards. They have a lot of sort of guidance, stuff like that, which is available to download and read online. And then there's the if you like sort of Google integrated reporting, and you'll go to the integrated reporting standards, and there's a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of presentations, a lot of summary documents. There's the standard, the integrated reporting standard as well, where you could read that if you were a bit more interested in understanding how the standard works, and how a framework, the IR kind of framework, can be applied within an organization. But yeah, I mean, it's a big ocean out there, Larry, on this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'd definitely do that if I was I have done.
I've certainly seen some presentations from different software companies, some of them mobile platforms, where they're talking about being able to get the information into the right categories so that it's easy to access. But almost every sort of 10 minutes into the presentation, the speaker made a point of saying, reporting the numbers does not improve your numbers. You need to do something to improve your numbers. We are only selling you a framework for you to be able to document this. What we're doing isn't going to improve your ESG rating. It's just going to help you with the simplicity of the reports and the centralization of it all. And I thought that was also very interesting. Now, Waddah, did it all, my guess is this all started back when they tried to sell mutual funds for green companies, and some of the companies that were in this fund got exposed as being anything but green when it came to the environment and sustainability. That would have been mid 1990s or something like that. So is that maybe part of it as well too, that again,
I mean, yeah, there was a lot of greenwashing, whitewashing, whatever you want to call it, so of course, there was issues, and there were companies who went out. I mean, there were even big oil companies, out there. I don't want to mention the names. Some of them are in America, some of them are in other parts of the world, who got into serious trouble in places like Latin America and Nigeria and places like that, where they were saying, "Oh, we were doing this and doing that," and actually what they ended up doing was all in fact, unethical or environmentally damaging. They've changed since then. They moved away since then. But I think the disclosure is sort of the voluntary reporting, and this whole notion of voluntary reporting was something that happened after probably after the turn of the century. Because beyond 2000, there was a lot of this stuff about disclosure and about people wanting to sort of report out that they were doing things well. Some of them were actually because they were doing things well. They wanted to tell people they're doing things well. But some of them because they had a responsibility to add to society. Some of them were actually investing. If you were investing, if you're a contractor, for example, and you had equal rights and you had equal opportunities and you did this, compared to other people who were just abusing, maybe with the workforce in the short term, they were probably being more profitable. So the companies who were responsible were saying, no, we're doing this and we're doing that, but they wanted to level the playing field and encourage other people to also follow suit. So I think the ESG movement overall has been very, very good, because it's helped push through a lot of the practices that we as HSE practitioners for many, many years, for the last 2-3 decades, been trying to push organizations to move towards. And the idea of that is, again, because when you look at the share price, my friend, the share price is directly proportional to the sustainability index. So it makes good business sense. So it gets the attention of executives.
It all does make good business sense, but that's what I was saying earlier. But it's an incredibly, to me, it's a very important point here, that versus I'm just trying to stay one step ahead of the regulators is a much different position than I'm trying to stay one step ahead of my competitors. And if there's money behind, as long as there's money behind staying one step ahead of your competitors, I have a lot, like I'm fairly optimistic about this ESG thing in terms of, it's maybe there'll be a lot of people who could say, well, it's 20 years too late or whatever, 30, 40 years. I'm not trying to get into the timing. I just think that obviously, and I'm not trying to slag the inspectors or the it's just that I've heard for years and years people say, the people that direct these institutions like OSHA saying we don't have enough resources to get to all of the companies. And I remember a guy saying, I've been listening to you say this for 20 years at these conferences. You're never going to have enough resources to make it work this way. When are you going to get it changed so that you do? And I thought about it going, it's never going to happen, because we're not willing to pay for that many inspectors or that many police. I mean, and even if we did double the number of police in the highway, I don't think anybody believes we'd reduce the traffic accidents, the fatals, 50% at all. So until there's a better driver for this,
it'll be very good for the donut market, I think.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be. Now. We've only got about 15 minutes, Watt. I've seen lots of questions here. There was one from JC Sakar.
Larry, just because I'm gonna just close the presentation so I can actually see you, because I've not been able to see you this whole time.
Oh well, I can see you. Go for it.
No, So I just wanted to say that there is an interesting for HSE practitioners, and because we're talking about business, there is a book that I did publish with a guy called Dr. Cooling a few years back on the 10-step MBA. I think you've seen it, Larry. But it's basically published by Routledge. But it's a very practical book and focused on knowledge bridging and challenges. And it talks about governance and CSR. It talks about general management. It talks about how to manage things as an executive as opposed to just an HSE officer. So there's the link and whatever. If anyone's interested, you can look it up. We are working.
I can't see the link yet, Waddah. Could you put it back up on the link? Because I was just for everybody listening, I was actually suggesting that Dr. Waddah put up because he's done this, the 10-step MBA virtually with the GLC group in Europe. And if you had your slide up there, I didn't know whether or not, or they could contact you for more information on when you want to do when you're doing your next one, Waddah.
Well, I mean, they can send you the stuff, Larry, and we'll catch up on it. It's not a problem. But this was really just to tell them that this book is out there, and if they're interested in this kind of stuff and interested in really getting more involved in executive management, this is a good book. I'm actually in the process of just getting an approval to publish a book on sustainability and the role of boards of directors and stuff like that as well. But that book ain't going to be out for at least another year and a half probably by the time we're done with it.
You're going to do that with Routledge as well? You're going to publish that with Routledge as well?
Yeah, that is with Routledge as well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I'm gonna end this. Stop sharing the screen, and I'm back. So all yours, man.
I've been seeing you for a while, Waddah, instead of your screen. But anyhow, there were a couple questions so far. One of them,
thanks.
One of them that was up there before was, and you touched on it already. Any specific thoughts on greenwashing, which tends to cloud some of the ESG reports? So I know you talked a bit about that, but I think if you wanted to comment on that any further, Waddah, I mean, like by, for instance, using something like GRI or, basing everything against an ISO standard, can you combat a bit of that, faking that we're doing better than we are? Or is there it is voluntary, right now, like there isn't somebody that
it is. I mean it depends. See, it depends. I'll tell you. I mean, many companies. I mean, you remember what happened with Volkswagen, and the emissions.
Yeah.
Thing. I mean, the damage to that brand and to that organization, and obviously the executives and the board were all taken to task about that. And although when you look at it, really, I mean, even with the emission difference, the impact on the environment wasn't that big. And that's a good example of ESG and why we look at E, S, and G, because it was an environmental issue because they were claiming that they had lower emissions on their cars. But the real issue that why people got really pissed off with them was because of the governance, because of the fact that they had governance on what was going on and they couldn't check what was happening. The best way, you go to a report and you look at validated, verified report, but you can actually probably, I mean, you have to be, look at the sort of what's being reported, and you can study that and you can compare them to peer groups, and you can see how they're doing in terms of, and then compare. But a lot of companies, honestly, Larry, they're very, 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 very careful about what they would say that they're doing, because today, my friend, with one of these, you could lose half your share price, in like a couple of hours with when a WhatsApp message goes viral. So people behave, people start behaving. right?
Well, it's interesting because I mean, there's obviously whenever something's voluntarily reported, it usually is shored up in a fairly short time period where there's people, third-party auditors, there's private enterprise, if you will, sort of fills the void and say, we'll come in and validate whether or not you really do this and whether you don't. So I'm sure there's going to be, better, like you say, people be more careful about this, but they'll also probably need, just like you used to have third parties come in and audit your safety management system. It couldn't all be internal and stuff like that too, right? So I think that there probably will be a need for some of that. Let me just, Mike, if there's any other questions that
self-reporting. So this is self-reporting can invite fraud. Is there a governing or peer review, something to ensure investors? Yes, I mean, some of the big companies, what they do is they get a verified report, right? So your report is actually certified. So you submit your GRI whatever 4 report, and that's verified. So that means that you get an extra validation. Not everyone does it because frankly speaking, it costs money and takes a lot of time. But many organizations invest in that, especially who are big in the capital markets. But so that's the way to ensure, sort of assure investors. The question here from Kevin saying about Enron. No, I mean, Enron is a different story. I mean, over there it was more the G was the serious problem. They had a big serious problem. The chairman and CEO of Enron, had all his golf buddies, on the board with him. They sort of, as they say, turkeys never vote for Christmas, and they were all happy, go lucky going together. So I hope that answers the question quickly. There's Keith saying, is there a greater risk now with social media and keyboard warriors? For sure, and filming. There are a lot of videos of things that are happening, and it can cause a very serious problem. I think the regulators are finding difficulty with managing this. I mean, we saw this during COVID and the fake news and the people who are sort of against vaccines and with vaccines, and all these people are bringing in experts to talk about if you take this vaccine, you probably end up with a third eye, or your nose or another part of your anatomy might fall off or something like that, and you couldn't stop these people, and people were actually listening to this, and it was causing really big issues. That's why companies, what they say is that, look, this is the reliable data. This is my
Hey, Mike.
Hi, do you have me? Sorry.
I have you. I don't have Waddah. I don't know where he went. He cut out pretty quickly.
It looks like he just logged back on. Here he is.
Oh, there he is.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. It was see, it was one of those keyboard warriors, Keith, who tried to take me out, But
I was going to ask you, Waddah, there's Thomas from Germany, Thomas Bergdorf is he's asking. You can answer the question however you'd like, kind of, but how much attention is given by investors to the health and safety chapter in the ESG reports? And then Dr. Qatari just was asking about profit being the bottom line. Should we have something else being the bottom line? Well, we probably should, AJ, but I don't know if we'll ever see more than profit being on the bottom line in our lifetime, which is why I'm kind of encouraged about ESG, really. But proportionally, is it more of like, if things are going okay, obviously, if you have a disaster like Deepwater Horizon, that's going to have a tremendous effect on your share price. But
And it did.
Thomas's question, if things aren't, I guess to frame it better, Thomas, or I'll take a shot at it. If things, you don't have any disasters on hand per se, how much weighting does the safety and health part of ESG typically come into play from an investor point of view?
Well, I think it's important. I think some investors definitely.
It depends on the investors' values too, right?
Yeah. Well, not only the investors' values. I think it depends on three things. It depends on the investors' values. It depends also on the industry that you're in. Yeah, because if you're in the industry where health and safety, like we know that we kill a lot of people out in the industry, or the food industry and stuff like that. The apparel industry has become very, very important because of SA 8000 and social accountability audits, and that health and safety features really, really big time in that. Sweatshops and stuff like that. So it depends on the industry, but it also depends on, and as we saw, and you'll understand, it's self-explanatory. During COVID-19, the companies who had good health and safety policies and didn't have to think about, should we care about our our employees, or our employees most important? Shall we get them to work at home? Should we give them the PPE, or should we tell them that they should buy their own PPE and masks to come to workplaces and stuff like that? I mean, I know it sounds a bit silly, but there's some organizations who are borderline unethical when it comes to health and safety. So, and some industries have been tainted with that, regrettably. So I think the question is that it depends, and I hope that answers Thomas's question. Instead of profit being the bottom line, should we have something else being the bottom line? Well, I mean, that's the triple bottom line. So people today, Mr. Ajay, are actually saying, look, you got to measure organizations' performance on its social value, the return on social investment, and there's a way of doing these kind of calculations for companies. Some people report on their social investment and report return on social investment, especially to investors. There is carbon footprint, for example, GHG emissions. Depending, if you're a power plant, then yeah, you're definitely reporting on carbon footprint and GHG emissions. If you are you're a company that has a lot of solid waste, then you're going to be reporting on that. So it depends on what's important. But yeah, the triple bottom line is looking at your environmental and social and economic performance. So and the profitability. So you look at profitability over time, because if you have better ESG performance, generally your company is more sustainable over time. So long-term investors, if you've invested and you've kept your shares in a certain company and they've been giving you good dividends and stuff like that, if suddenly you have a black swan event like Deepwater Horizon and stuff like that, and you were holding BP shares at the time at 7.8 at £7.80, and then suddenly 2 days later your share price has just gone down to £4.60, then you should be really very, very worried. And I'm sure that the investors were really, really worried, and especially the institutional investors. I mean, big companies such as BP have got massive institutional investors. I mean, the UK pension fund, for example, so some of these businesses have really, really been put to the test. I think, where is the position of ESG within the org chart? Well, a good question. I think the chief sustainability officer is probably facilitating most of that. Some organizations within their strategy department, I think more mature organizations who have a mature strategy department should have that position within the chief strategy officer. But at the end of the day, the CEO and all the ELT should all be very much responsible and feel responsible for ESG performance. The next question, it seems having an ESG would be an evolving indicator for organizational maturity. Do you agree? Yes, I think even the GRI standard, the whole standard actually evolved with time. So GRI 1, 2, 3, 4.1, 4.2 all these standards that evolved, and they were voluntary reporting standards, and organizations, they don't necessarily have to subscribe to all the 120, I don't know, plus indicators. With your materiality, when you do, you remember I spoke about materiality. So when you do your materiality with your stakeholders, your internal and external stakeholders, they tell you, well, that's important. This is important to us, and you take the top 10, 20 aspects that you're looking at, and then you look at the indicators which are connected to those aspects, and then you monitor those, and then you put them in your. So many sustainability reports, at the back of the report, you're going to see the list of indicators, and in the report, in the body of the report, they're going to talk about the results of the stakeholder engagement and the materiality assessment that took place. And I hope that sort of makes sense. It's a bit difficult to explain because, you know, if you haven't been involved in it, it's a bit difficult to sort of explain. But anyway, you just identify what's important, what's materially important. You choose the indicators from the back of the and you put them in the back of your sustainability report and say, well, look, I'm reporting on these 30 or these 60 or 70. But nobody reports on all 120 because not everything is materially important. I mean, everything is somewhat important, but you want to focus on the you know, the 80-20 rule, the Pareto 80-20 rule, the stuff that's important, right? Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Waddah, we're past the hour. Is there any other, I don't want to say burning questions up there, Mike, but what I might suggest everybody is that Larry at safestart.com is my email. If you have another question that you'd like Dr. Waddah to answer, just please send it to me. I'll forward it on to him, and we'll, between the two of us, I'm not saying right away, but you know, within a reasonable amount of time, we'll get your question answered. Waddah, once again, thank you so much. I mean, I learned a lot. I actually thought I knew a fair bit about it before we got talking on the show, and now I realize you know, so much more. So first of all, thanks very much for taking us through all that, and for the time to put it all together too, because I know, you know, it's, people say, well, you just whip up a PowerPoint, but you still got to think about it a lot. And like I said, I know how busy you are. So thanks very much, Waddah. And again, thanks very much for the idea of doing this show. It's been great. And in 2 weeks, I don't know if you remember him from the conference in Berlin, Waddah, but Michael Cook is going to be on the show with me to talk about the difficulties of getting modern safety into the old school system. And it came up just last night. Zach was asking me, he's the Safe Start person and consultant in Iraq, and he's asking me why is this not in schools? Why is it not in trade schools? And I just gave him the very basic, is that the schools want the school boards to pay for it, and the school boards want the schools to pay for it. And just that little problem right there can spin you around for so long that it's very difficult to make a business or any kind of profitable business out of it.
Well, Larry, if I can say that means that, you know, basically the kids end up paying for it, you know, but end up paying the price, you know, at the end of the day for that. It's quite sad.
Well, it is, but it's not that there haven't been we have had some successes. Michael's had some with his previous employer, and he's starting again now with Jabil. And again, one of the things that I've found is that, you know, making it easy, making it, you know, more like Hollywood, like, in other words, make it entertaining so that they just watch it over and over and over again and they get it, is actually almost easier than trying to get the teachers to teach it. But it should be a very interesting show, the trials and tribulations. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. And again, Waddah, thanks so much for putting this together for us. It was great. And if you have any further questions, it's just Larry at safestart.com. So
yeah, you can catch me on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, I've got a LinkedIn account. So you guys, anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. Okay, and Larry, man, Thanks very
We're
much,
going to
man.
try to put this 10-step MBA on virtually sometime, I think, probably within the next 4 to 6 weeks, Waddah. So again, please let us know if you're interested. And, certainly I think there'll be a big help for health and safety practitioners when you're talking to people about ESG and at that level. It certainly helps if you can speak the language a bit better. All right, Waddah, thank you again so much. Thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Now, guys.